I call the Minister of State, Mr Jim Pace.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I genuinely congratulate the Honourable Lady on taking the opportunity to raise the issue of vegans on, as she said, World Vegan Day, and to elaborate on her thoughts and the views that she and her colleagues take. As she rightly identified at the outset, she and I are not going to agree on some of these issues, but I do respect her intensity of her views, which we've exchanged several times over the dispatch box about a number of things. Can I just say, though, that I don't think she does her cause helped by some of the quite wide exaggerations that she's made in her speech this evening. I mean, to talk about an intensive dairy farm akin to a multi-storey car park is frankly ludicrous. There is no suggestion. Well, the Honourable Lady sitting in from sedentary position, and I would need to get this in the record, Mr Speaker, talking about cows on top of each other. There is no such question. The proposal at Nocton, which of course is now dead anyway as a proposal, but it was not talking about a multi-storey facility. It doesn't do the cause any good to exaggerate like that. I hope I can answer some of her questions. As she said, some of them have strayed a little bit from my brief. I think many of the answers to her questions are in the Foresight report, which was published by the government chief scientist early this year in January. That's all about the future of food and farming. It's looking not just at the UK, but at the global demand and supply for food over the next 30, 40 years up to the period of 2050. And we're having this debate the day after apparently the 7 billionth person was born on this planet, and it's quite right that we have to think about the security of our food supply across the globe. There's no doubt, and the Foresight report made this clear, that the current food system is consuming the world's natural resources at an unsustainable rate. I'd agree with the Honourable Lady at that. At this rate, we will continue to degrade our environment, and we will compromise the world's capacity to produce food in the future, and indeed to contribute to climate change and further destruction of our biodiversity. So the status quo is not an option. And that is why in DEFRA we have put sustainable food and farming at the forefront of what we're doing. It's the first priority of our business plan. It underpins everything, and we're looking at the food chain in its entirety to help secure an environmentally sustainable and healthy supply of food and to create the conditions for the agri-food sector to succeed. And the Foresight report did highlight, as she asked the question, highlight the significance of dietary changes to the sustainability of our food supply, given that some foods require, as she rightly said, more resources in their production than others. We all need to play a part. But the most important people in all of this are consumers, and they can be best helped to make the choice that they want to make, as long as they have, as the Honourable Lady suggested, consistent messages about what constitutes a sustainable balanced diet, and indeed what is in the products that they are purchasing. And by providing a robust evidence base, we can work closely with a wide range of partners to try to ensure they have this information. The issue of diet is complex. Across the world, of course, there are cultural, social and religious factors influencing the makeup of what we eat, and it's not at the view of the government that we should undermine those influences. We do see value in encouraging people to think carefully about the environmental impact of the food they eat, and groups such as the Vegan Society do provide information for consumers and help to increase their knowledge. But we also need to recognise that a vegan diet is not for everyone. And I would say to the Honourable Lady, I got a bit confused in her speech whether she was advocating veganism or she was concerned about animal welfare or she was simply talking about a balanced diet and a lower proportion of processed meat, with which I entirely agree, incidentally. We know that there are recommendations that you shouldn't eat too much processed meat, but that is a long stretch from the more extreme position of a vegan, which, as she said earlier in her speech, means absolutely no product of animal origin at all. There is a great difference there. We're talking about a balanced diet, and the government is not going to tell people what or what not to eat. It is about providing information to make informed choices. And she raised the issue of food labelling, and we are, as she knows, committed to improving food labelling. It's been one of our prominent policies, both in opposition and in government. Currently, as she knows, there is no definition in law for the use of the term vegan, and labelling is entirely voluntary. However, if that labelling is used, consumers are protected by the law because it would be illegal to mislead consumers by false or misleading labelling. And that is where the new European regulation on the provision of food information to consumers comes in. It will be published in the next few months and will then enter into force across all member states. And it does cover the rules for general food and nutrition labelling. And in the regulation, the Commission is required to draft a set of implementing measures around the use of the terms vegetarian and vegan. So I hope that answers her concern at that. It is being addressed and will be addressed. The government's promotion of advice for a balanced diet, of course, applies to vegetarians and vegans and people who eat a lot more livestock products. And it's perfectly true that a well-planned diet based on anything, as long as it contains the right balance of food, can be healthy. The biggest issue is, of course, facing us is obesity. It's a leading cause of serious disease, such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and, of course, costs the NHS £5 billion a year. The government's recently published document, A Call to Action on Obesity in England, sets out how obesity will be tackled in the new public health and NHS systems and the role partners can play. It is a serious problem, and it's a responsibility of individuals to change their behaviour to benefit their health. Most of us are eating or drinking more than we need to, and we're not active enough. Being overweight or obese is a consequence of eating more calories than we need, increasing of... Yes, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and it's just a brief point, and I note his comment that he said it's the responsibility of individuals with regard to their diet and their obesity, etc. But will he not accept, though, that companies like McDonald's ruthlessly and specifically target young children in order to force on them a diet which is wholly unhealthy and contributes considerably to the obesity crisis that the nation is currently experiencing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, no, I don't accept that. I mean, of course, any business, and the Honourable Lady reeled off a list of vegan organisations and businesses, retailers in Bristol, and fine, but they've all got a right to advertise their wares as long as they're selling something that is lawful. And I don't believe it's for government to tell them that they should not do so. What matters is that we encourage people to reduce the amount of calories that we consume in whatever form those calories are. And as part of the government's ongoing Change for Life campaign, we're encouraging people to make those simple changes. Eat more fruit and vegetables, cutting down on fatty foods, particularly unsaturated fats, reducing calorie consumption, and, of course, being more active. Yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I have to say that this section of his speech does sound rather like filler, because he doesn't want to actually talk about the issues I've addressed. But he did say slightly earlier that it's important that people get the right balance in their diets. Can you tell the House what the government regards as the right balance of eating red meat and processed meat in a diet?
I'm grateful to the honourable member. No, I can't tell her precisely. Those are the responsibilities of the Health Education Agency and Department of Health. They're not, as she rightly said in her earlier comments, not part of my remit. But there is a wealth of information about a balanced diet, and roughly the proportion, 70 grams a day of meat is established as a good figure to base one's diet on. I just wanted to... I'm going to ask the Honourable Lady's questions. I think she does me a disservice in suggesting I wasn't going to. But I do think these points are very, very important because they are all part of the significance of a balanced diet. But what is clear, and I come back to the Foresight report, which I opened my remarks with, that we need to achieve a sustainable food supply, to use the whole range of measures that are available to us. And I come back to the Honourable Lady's point about where she was talking about the consumption of grain to produce meat. I have to say to her, 2/3 of the world's farming area is grass. Yeah. And the only way to turn grass into food is to feed it through livestock. And if we were to remove all that livestock from the system, then the world would be a lot shorter of food. Yeah. I mean, it's a simple fact. What else is she going to do? I mean, the Honourable Lady looks askance, but she should understand there are large parts of this world which will not grow grain, Either the terrain is wrong, the soil is too thin, the climate is wrong, and therefore grass is the only option if it is to produce food. She also referred to the figure of 8 kilos to produce a kilo of beef, and on the face of it that is correct if all you feed them is grain. But as I've just implied, a very large proportion of the beef in the world and the sheep meat is produced from grass. And in many cases it never sees a grain of a cereal diet. And that's the reality of what's going on. Yes, there are beef feedlots in America where they're only fed on grain. Of course there are. And those figures are right. But to use those figures as if it applies to the whole industry right across the world, I'm afraid is entirely misleading. In fact, the bigger consumers of grain are pigs and poultry because they eat nothing else. They only can be fed on grain and soybean. And on the subject of soya, I point out to the Honourable Lady, she talked about the rainforest and the increasing desecration of the rainforest to produce arable crops. The main one is soybean, and of course what is it that most people who don't eat meat eat? It is soya. And indeed soya-derived products are actually a major part of the I mean, how one can have a haggis made of soya, my honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland, but you can get a vegetarian haggis, I'm told.
You can.
But this is the point. Soya is the staple diet of people who don't eat meat, and that soya is just as much a point. It's coming from the No, I'm not going to give away any more in a minute. I've only got a couple of minutes left. I go back to where I started about foresight, because DEFRA has signed up to a 5-point action plan to take it forward, and that's very important. And I'm going to turn to the Honourable Lady's questions. She asked about the climate change talks in Copenhagen, and to the best of my knowledge, no. The answer, she appreciates I've only had these a few minutes. I know we spoke briefly before the debate, but to the best of my knowledge, it's not on the agenda at the moment. She asked about the European counterparts in terms of the CAP. The answer is no, we haven't talked about veganism or what I'm not sure precisely what she wants us to talk to them about, but it's very early days in the reform of the CAP. At the moment, there is absolutely no unanimity across of the Commission's proposals for the reform of the CAP. She alleges that 80% of the EU's animals are factory farmed. I suppose that depends on the definition of factory farming, but I find that very difficult to believe. I've spoken about development policy and global food security. That's all covered in the Foresight report. She asked about the assessment we've made of the health benefits of a diet low in meat and dairy consumption. Again, I've addressed it. It is a matter of balance. It's not a question of doing without them. It is a question of keeping the intake to a sensible level, and the figures are available from the various government bodies. Food labelling I've addressed. It is going to be resolved. As far as the EU directive on animal experimentation is concerned, I'm afraid I don't know the answer. It is a matter for the Home Office, and I cannot answer that. As far as the proposed network of marine protected areas are established, my honourable friend, the member for Newbury, is working very hard on all of this, along with Natural England, and to the best of my knowledge, they will be making sure that wildlife is protected. But that is a long way from the implication that we shouldn't be eating fish, which is, I thought, was the Honourable Lady's approach. I hope I have addressed her main principles. As I said from the outset, we're not going to entirely agree on this, but she's raised an issue and the House has heard what she has to say.
Order. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.